This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gyro Drilling. They provide world-class drilling solutions for all types of projects. They specialise in auger, aircore and RC drilling. Head to the team at Gyro Drilling for all your mining needs and see how they can help you with your upcoming project. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. As this podcast grows, every subscriber helps. From those of you who watch this on YouTube or to those that listen on Spotify and Apple, every follower helps. If you do this one favour and hit follow on whatever platform you find us on, I promise I will continue to look and find fascinating people across the world and bring their perspectives to you. Thank you and enjoy this episode. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me today on the show is Glenn Grayson, the Managing Director of Aruma Resources, which is listed on the ASX under code AAJ. It's a small cap company in the exploration scene with a vast amount of projects, and there's been a bit of exciting news naturally. So he's here to talk about it all. So welcome, Glenn.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's great to be here.
Talk us to, we'll go through the whole company and where it's focused and where the projects are. But before, I always like to understand who I'm speaking with and what their history is and where they've come from. So just go through a little bit about who you are as a person and how you found yourself in this position as the managing director.
Okay, so originally from Victoria, grew up there, went to university at Ballarat. And as most of us did back then, we just made our way to Perth and get into the resources over here. I was back in the mid-90s for me. Did a bit of work in and around Southern Cross and Meekatharra for a few years. And then, as we've all done as well, we went through a downturn at the end of the 90s. I made my way back to Victoria for a period, actually worked in part of defence for quite a while. Learnt some really good skills there, and then it was time to get back into mining for me, so started working at Fosterville. That was back when Fosterville was a stock standard.
Not familiar from my point.
4.5 gram ore body. I did drill a hole. I was talking to the GM at the time, who went on to be the vice president for Kirkland Lake. I did drill a hole in about 2011, and I explained to him where that hole was. He didn't remember it, and I said, "How far did that miss the swan zone by?" And he said, "Probably about 6 metres." So I could have been a hero, but anyway, I missed it. And there's lots of talk about being able to find one of those, and I drilled a hole really close to a pretty amazing lode there, and you couldn't tell near it. There was nothing in the rocks to suggest you were
6 metres away.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, that's my hard luck story.
Yeah.
Went from there back to Kalgoorlie. Looked after the exploration around Kalgoorlie for Barrick and then Northern Star when they took over the operations. From then, in and around the goldfields, around Leonora for quite a few years with a junior called Kin, who are in the news a little bit at the moment with Genesis buying some of their assets. And then about 2 years ago or 18 months ago, jumped into the role at Aruma. So that was previous MD I'd known for quite a few years, good friends with his son, and he was looking for someone to jump into his seat. So I jumped on board.
Interesting. And when you were first approached with that opportunity, I mean, what were they selling to you? What were they really talking about that got you interested to begin with, given that you've had quite a history in a lot of different projects? What made this one so attractive?
Yeah, I guess I'm essentially an old gold geo, so I like gold. So the model that he was using to peg his ground was gold. And I just thought there was potential. So he had some good drilling intercepts down at Salmon Gums. He drilled a hole that had 5 metres at 50 grams in it. There's some interesting assets up in the Pilbara, so one about 140k southwest of Newman, another one in and around the old Poulson's mine that now Black Cat syndicated getting going again. So just projects that were interesting. So.
And I mean, again, saying that you had a lot of passion for gold. I mean, did you ever really expect the sort of smorgasbord of commodities coming into the spotlight now, given the current sort of exploration freedom and licenses?
It is a bit, and one of them, I guess, is because gold's just hasn't seen any love for juniors at all recently. But one of the things that a good exploration GA should do is recognise what is there. So you might peg the ground thinking you're looking for gold, but if you can recognise that there's something else there, then that's what you end up turning it into. So I call it pegging the right ground for the wrong reasons. So,
That's about. And we were talking before we started about the actual name, and it was probably a good segue into what the company is. But Aruma Resources has a bit of history to its name. But I mean, how do you best describe the company, and then, probably the name as well?
So I guess I like to just see the value in what we have. So if that's gold, that's great. If it's other things, cobalt, manganese, copper, rare earths, it's seeing the value in it. Aruma itself, so the name was conceived by one of the previous chairmen, and it means it's an Indigenous word that means happy place. It's not a rumour. It's something you heard on the side. It's quite an interesting name when you know the history of it. And I usually close out presentations with remember. It's an Aboriginal word meaning happy place, and it gets a bit of attention.
Yeah, well, I brought it a little bit forward now, so hopefully that hasn't spiraled the thinking. But a lot of the conversation today is focused on the new projects that you've brought into the suite. So I don't know where particularly you want to start with which state or which boundary, but if you want to go through some of the reasons and how those projects came to the forefront and why you guys have decided to take them on board.
So I guess the reason why... So I took over running Aruma 15, 16 months ago, and one of the, as a board we discussed was progressing the tenements to work out, have we really got some prospective ground, or do we need to rationalise and go and find some new projects? So I worked pretty hard for 12 months on that. Did a lot of drilling at Salmon Gums, did a fair bit of groundwork up at Saltwater up in the Pilbara. Or Ashburton it is actually. And slowly sort of progressing through the project sort of realised that we really need to refresh. And so that's when we went searching for some new projects. We have actually been in the really good place where we have a really good R&D claim set up based on a project model that we call golden sediments, or it's essentially any metal in sediments. And we get a really good rebate each year based on the work we do on the ground. So last year we got a bit over $1 million back.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So when we're looking for a new projects, as we were doing it with a pretty healthy bank balance. So I think at the start in the last quarterly, we had about $2.7 million in the bank. So pretty healthy bank balance for a junior. And it was, do I want to spend that money on the old projects, or do I want to really have refresh ourselves and find something new? And again, as a board, so on my board's Brett Smith, who's a really experienced geologist in Western Australia, and James Moses, who's a sort of investor relations consultant based in Sydney. So pretty good different skill sets there. And we just thought we needed a refresh.
Okay. So. And then, again, talking about the states, maybe we could start with South Australia and then progress into Queensland. I mean, what's the South Australia package look like, and what do you really got in the focus?
Yep, so it's two tenements about 140 kilometres north of Olympic Dam in the Gawler Craton. Pretty large package. It's about 2,000 square kilometres. It's just immediately adjacent to where Copper Search are doing some work. Looking for their copper gold, but it's several sort of model targets. There's ISCG looking for something similar to an Olympic Dam style. So it's got we're looking for gravity targets. But generally above them in the Proterozoic, there's said copper mineralisation present, Emily Bluff type stuff, and then of course there's the uranium. And we do actually have some really good targets for uranium on the project with Player Lake sort of style roll front models we're using. So that's pretty exciting. The other two projects are in Queensland, so again, really exciting, and they're copper gold in the Mount Isa region. And you talk to some copper experts and they say there's no better place to go and look for copper still, globally almost. So pretty excited about that.
So you got a bit of a spread there, again, within Australia, which we know some of the pros for that being a tier 1 jurisdiction. But if we look at the South Australia first and foremost, was there much, I guess, previous work done? Or, I mean, what's the going in with a bit of a blank slate to have a bit of fun with? I mean, what's the real composure of the composition of this project?
That's a good one to question. It is such a large area that's almost untouched. So with the ISCG targeting, you are relying on some government geophysics, and really you're looking through anywhere between 200 metres to 1,000 metres of cover. We think we're looking between the 200 to sort of 400 metres of cover area. Copper Search have been doing some drilling where they don't have a lot of cover at all. So you're really relying on going with a model to go in there and start looking for the ISCGs type stuff. And it's just going to be starting from scratch, really.
Yeah, gotcha. So then, I mean, going through your brain already, have you started? What are the processes in getting all that, say, paperwork sorted so that you can get on the ground, like, working with the traditional owners, or, even just getting the permits done with the South Australian government? I mean, what are the steps involved in getting on site and getting it all cranking?
So it is a little bit similar to Western Australia. They have a process called a PEPA. And that's similar to a West Australian POW. A couple extra steps where you certainly need every stakeholder's approval. So it's landholder as well as local Aboriginals and traditional owners. I have been to see the corporation that runs that group, so they're called the Arabana people, and they are open to having agreements and exploring. They have a process that you've just got to go through, which is presenting to directors approving you and what you want to do, but then they also have the community then vote. So that does have those steps that will just take a little bit of time, but they have got agreements in place relatively recently. Like I said, Copper Search is one, Oz Minerals, which is now BHP as well, recent agreements to go and explore. So they're open to exploring.
Mining and exploring,
and it's just... Yes, one of the big things they are protective of is their area has a lot of the artesian basin mineral springs in it, so that's what they want protected. So it's just understanding in and around, I guess, the drinkable water sources that is.
Don't want anyone near that.
No, that's
very fair.
That's what they
want to keep your water and access to it. Given the land size of it, I mean, there's a fair bit to explore. And you said what predominantly coverage, or when you're talking about, painting the picture of what it even looks like. Have you had a chance to go out and start looking at it all and understanding just how big a landmass you guys have got?
Yep, I went out there for a trip, and it's big, it's flat. It's just to the west of Lake Eyre, so that's sort of gives you an idea of the area. Lots of sand dunes and player lakes, and it's just arid. There's just not much out there, so you've really got to be set up to do your work in your field season. So we'll be setting up for that. Take the time to get through these agreements that we need to set up, and then get ready for that field season. Probably going to take this time next year to get on there. So.
Yeah. So then you've got that happening, and then at the same time you've got Mount Isa and Queensland. And I mean, talk us through whereabouts that area is, and maybe for those that aren't familiar with Mount Isa, I mean, probably many are seeing the price of copper and a few of the arguments about where that should be trending towards. And you said it earlier, just the spot to be in some regard. Talk us through a little bit about that area for those that are not familiar with it.
It is. Well, so the two projects are north of Mount Isa. One of them is called Batola, is immediately adjacent to Capricorn Copper project at 29 Metals has been having some trouble with. And the other project, Fiery Creek, is a little bit further north. Both are in the western succession of the Mount Isa inland. So I guess the Mount Isa inland is divided into three parts: the eastern succession, then there's a local middle section, and then there's the eastern succession. Eastern succession is known for IOCGs, so Ernest Henry is the best known one there. And then the western succession is more known for the strata-bound or stratiform said copper, ore bodies like Mount Isa and Century. So it's going in there, and we're in the western succession, western fold belt, and it's understanding what is it that Queenslanders have done and geologists up there have done over the last 40 years, and can someone with some fresh eyes throw something different at it. So I guess one of the main reasons why the Mount Isa region is getting a lot of focus now for mainly smaller companies and juniors. And so the big companies went in there looking for the 50 million tonne Mount Isa ore bodies and haven't been successful. But now, since Glencore have announced the shutdown of their underground copper mine and their concentrator, then there's a lot of space in their smelter and other process plants in the district for more copper ore. So that's where some of these other companies are finding these 3 to 5 million tonne ore bodies, and they're getting a lot of focus. What Carnaby are doing. They're not big ore bodies and they're not great grade. 3 to 5 million tonnes, 1.2 to 1.4% copper. But because the Queensland government are doing a lot to help the region now, since Glencore's announcement, it's made it a lot easier to go in there, and you're really starting to get value for that hasn't been there in the past. So that's what we're going to sort of target, is these smaller ore bodies. So one of the projects in particular, called Fiery Creek, over the last 20 years or 30 years has been pegged by MIM, which is now Glencore, has been held by BHP, has been held by Rio. Sumitomo had it for a while, and in amongst them was some juniors. But those guys went in there looking for the 50 million tonne ore body. None of them, Mount Isa, MIM or Glencore did a little bit back in the 90s, and Sumitomo did a little bit on the ground in around 2008-9. But the other companies didn't actually do anything on the ground, to the point where there's not even detailed geophysics. So that's where I think the potential is hidden in a 3 to 5 million tonne ore body, doing the detailed geophysics, doing a really good gravity survey, potentially MAGs, MEM, but coming out with these targets which the big guys
just didn't even really want to have a bar of it. Yeah, that's interesting, because they're not, small names that have had it, but again, have just gone, look, from our bank balance, we only want to invest it at a certain threshold to get it up and running, which means that there's plenty on the taking. It's just a matter of, for them, it's not really an interest, which is quite funny to say out loud. But so there, again, refocusing on the geophysics, and I mean, talking about the stages of it, you got a fair bit of, I guess, freedom now to sort of trial it, and as you said, a fresh pair of eyes. What really are the steps or the plans in place to then accelerate or get some activity happening with that?
So it's just seeing the opportunity, I guess. So it will be one thing about going to the region is you don't realise how rugged it is. It's
the terrain is not.
It's seriously hard work getting around.
A bit of a hiking.
Yeah, and you're going through long grasses and a lot of hills and it's hot and humid. It's just seriously hard work. So it's doing some work that'll so each of the projects is a bit over 300 square kilometres each. So they're reasonable in size as well, and it's doing the work remotely that you can. So whether it's some gravity, maybe it's some remote sensing, satellite imagery, hyperspectral work that will allow you to define some easily accessible targets first up, rather than trying to explore
everything, every inch of it.
Every inch you can narrow it down a bit and at least come up with some areas of interest that you really want to focus on. So that's probably the first step, and then it's not rocket science. So the main alteration systems around these is hematite and magnetite, so the IOCG, and it works the same for the South Australian ground. So the minerals around that make the rocks dense. So gravity surveys tend to work really well. Doesn't it's not,
Doesn't always.
not always. There are ore bodies in the Mount Isa belt that don't have those sort of alterations associated, but as a general rule, they're pretty good. So you do a really detailed gravity survey to highlight where you think these dense altered rocks are, then go in there and do we need to work out structure, so then you might do some magnetics, or do you just want to do some EM, which will work out if there's some sulfides present. So it's not reinventing the wheel. It's just, and I guess I've always done this throughout my career, is you just do the steps properly.
Yeah, gotcha.
So,
and you're talking there, again, going back to some of the bigger companies that had held it and then didn't really do much. I mean, in that area surrounding it, I mean, there are other notable success stories when you talked about the ones being closed down, sadly, but is there much sort of external activity happening around that area? And the government support is interesting from a, what sort of incentives have they got now to really help exploration companies find that, next deposit doesn't have to be 50 million tonnes, but it could be that, smaller sort of still needed resource.
So if Queensland government put a 5-year moratorium on exploration licence fees, so there's no rents or other fees for your tenure. But the other thing they're doing for North Queensland, so it's not just the Mount Isa area, is they're spending, I think it's $5 billion on power, getting extra electricity into far North Queensland. And, primarily it's going to be cleaner energy as well, but it's for industry to use. So they're really pushing for the regions to be successful up there.
And then, as I said, the companies in the surrounding area, is there much sort of activity with more people coming in, or what's the sort of flavour of that region?
So in and around Fiery Creek and Bartola, so Anglo-American, they've got a lot of ground pegged up in there. Rio are back in doing some exploration. There are a lot of juniors. Glencore has still got a lot of exploration ground as well. So there are some big names still in there exploring, and there are some other juniors that are doing really interesting work. So there's a company called SER.
Oh yes, yeah. David Tata. I've spoken with him
out of Melbourne. So that's the kind of work I guess I'm interested in sort of doing. So just that, not reinventing the wheel, but just doing it properly. So, and you'd be surprised how many geologists in the region have either come from or worked in Western Australia. So you're not actually going over there and having to start a network to get up and running. It's Carnaby MD. He's he spent a long time in the goldfields at Western Australia. So it's just so there's also a lot of help there if you're not from sort of the region.
Yeah. No, I do hear a lot about the WA, or the people that have worked within WA. They sort of sprawl out all over the world, and you always bump into an Aussie, but more so sounds like you bump into another Western Australian wherever you go. But I mean, this now really pivots some of the focuses, but you still had a bit of work done on some of the other projects. So what else is happening with some of the others that there has been a bit of work with, and maybe a bit more interest from investors or shareholders?
So my Salmon Gums project, it's still prospective for gold. I did some drilling last year that returned 6 metres at 10 grams in a diamond hole. But it's Norseman style mineralisation, which is tight and hard to model. So I do plan on getting back in there to do some more on that. Recently did some air core drilling that hit some rare earth clay-hosted stuff down there, which is essentially an extension of what OD6 and Meeker Metals have further to the south of me. So that did get a little bit of interest on market. Up to the north, I've got Saltwater Project, so that's about 150 kilometres southwest of Newman, and that's a 450 square kilometre package of tenure that's got a big chunk of an unconformity, the Bresner-Han-Wailu unconformity up there. So again, it was originally pegged for gold. There is gold there. We've got a good soil anomaly up there. No previous drilling, pretty much no previous mapping. come back with a 0.4 gram in soil gold with support with arsenic and antimony as well. So that shows that it's a strong anomaly. Hasn't come too far, so we plan on growing that area there. And then, so that's actually up in the western part of the project. In the eastern part, we've got some rare earth values. Our neighbours there with Dreadnought, they've got, I think, 4,000 square kilometres up there.
Yeah, they got fair bit of land holding.
Looking for rare earths and uranium as well, their model is. So it's just absolute greenfields. Like you go up there and it's some of it you can't get in on wheels. You need a helicopter, so it's just remote and takes time to really go through the land. So anything could be there. I've got another prospect there that's got up to, I think it's 68% iron in a goethite outcrop. It's also got some cobalt and copper, and so it's a 7 kilometre long ridge that's scavenged a lot of stuff, but what it actually is, I'm not sure yet. So there's a fair bit of work to do there. So saltwater is really exciting. I've got a project, as I said, around Poulson's at Melrose. So that's a lot of that ground is ground that Northern Star had. As I said, I work for Northern Star. I know the way they operated. They always had an exploration team at Poulson's. So because of that, I'm not sure I can do a better job than what geos, from Perth, and what geos who were on the ground up there doing. So
there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot going through.
There is.
So then I shouldn't say $1 million question, but the question comes to mind of how are you going to prioritise it all, given that you've got such a spread across? I mean, thankfully it's Australia, so there is still travelling and requirements within that. But how are you going to plan to prioritise and figure out which directions to lead, given that, especially, I think you've got almost all different ranging commodities under the spectrum. It's just a matter of, well, which ones do you follow, prioritise, and just allocate capital to yield the best results?
There's a strong feeling within West Perth anyway. Copper and gold are looking pretty solid. Gold's obviously had a fantastic run. A couple of wars around
the safe hedge of gold and gold breaking out. There's a bit of confidence boosting.
It is. So gold's going really strong, and copper is seen as that. It's seen as the future-facing metal that's needed, but it's also in demand. There is a shortfall, so the forecast for the pricing of copper is almost doubling over the next sort of 3 or 4 years as well. So there's a strong belief that copper and gold are really strong going into the future. Little bit of a uranium to put my head on in South Australia as well. So they're the ones I'm going to focus on, projects with gold and copper primarily, which doesn't prohibit me from still working on my current projects as well. So they are gold projects as well. So that's what I'll focus on.
Okay. And you talked about at the beginning some of the board members, and I'll get you to go back to those, just talk about who's alongside you, because from the conversation already, there is a lot running through your brain across different states, different projects and different targets, and just everything that needs to happen within that greenfield exploration. But who else is alongside you on the team?
So Brett Smith, who very experienced geologist, he's Managing Director of Corazon. He's on the board of TG6. So he's got a lot of connections in the industry. Really nice guy, really helpful to me. And I've got plenty of connections. I guess one thing about my history is I did do a lot of work out of Perth. So I was in Victoria for a while. I was in Kalgoorlie, and Kalgoorlie's in West Australia.
Yes,
There's not a lot of interaction between Kalgoorlie and West Perth. So he's got the connections that I find really useful in West Perth. And then James Moses is the chairman, and he's investor relations. He does investor relations for Aruma as well, and he certainly make sure I cross all my T's and dots my I's. But he's got a very good network in Sydney and Melbourne of that sort of investor sort of side of things, brokers, which a simple geologist just doesn't have.
No.
So that's really helpful for me as well.
So again, a relatively tight, compact team, which again puts a bit more onus on everyone to pull their weight. It's like you've got a massive team, especially in that small end of town in the small cap realm. But going forward, I always like to summarise conversations with key takeaways. We know, over 30 minutes, there might just be a few points people take away, and I think 3 keys is always a good place to start.
Yeah.
So if there's those points that you would emphasise that investors and shareholders alike should be remembering from the conversation today as what you're planning to do in the future, what would some of those points be?
Through my experience and background, I've found that you don't need to redesign things, you just need to do things properly. So that's one thing that I'll be doing. So making sure that we're going into Queensland, we're going to South Australia, but we're not going to reinvent the wheel, but the way to explore will be, we do this thoroughly and we do it properly. And I think that you don't miss out on things then. So you don't lose the needle in the haystack scenario. You don't
overlook something.
You've just got to be methodic and thorough. So that's the main point. I guess one of the good things about going into different terrains is you do take takeaways from different areas you worked. So having worked in Victoria, having worked in Western Australia, up in the Pilbara as well as the Yilgarn, there are different takeaways and different things that are important in your exploration that you can take into these new areas. So, which as I said before, you do find West Australian geos all
floating
over the place.
Around a bit. Yeah.
There's a young, or he's not so young now, he was young when he was working for me in Kalgoorlie, but I was teaching him things in Kalgoorlie that I learnt in Bendigo that wasn't actually necessarily that useful for him in Kalgoorlie. But now that he's in Queensland...
Translates nicely.
Yeah, which I actually learned it from a geo that had brought it from Mount Isa. So it's sort of like when you get a bit of mentoring, a bit of training early on and from different terrains, that can...
Opens up the potentials a bit more.
So it's just going into a new terrain but using your experiences to try and work out what's there. So as I said, the different parts of Mount Isa are known for different styles of ore bodies, so the ISCG in the east and the said copper in the west, but it's potentially the ISCG copper could be across the whole belt. And we've got Sumitomo did some diamond drilling at Fiery Creek that suggests there could be some ICG style alteration present. So it's just going in there, not with blinkers on either, so you don't want to go in there and just do what Queenslanders have always done, but it's taking your different experiences in and then hopefully doing it properly as well.
Okay. So there's a fair bit going to happen over these next sort of 12 months from the sounds of it. And for those that are looking to follow it and keep an eye on it, where can listeners and viewers go to keep an eye on AAJ?
Be doing conferences. I didn't get a Guernsey for the RIU in Sydney about to come up. That was in demand. I will be at the Investor Showcase on the Gold Coast in June. And then it's just... So Market Bull, you'll see activity on the Market Bull, miningnews.com.au. I've been there at the moment as well. So there's a few avenues where the news gets out. Proactive investors are usually really good as well. Yeah. So there's a few ways, and just send me an email. So.
Yeah. I think your email, or at least there are a few emails on all the ASX announcements. I know that's almost a normality now. You have to be available 24/7 for someone to reach out and speak with you.
That's right.
Maybe not in a format of a podcast like I sort of get the luxury of doing all the time, but yeah.
Depending on the shareholder, you can have some pretty long conversations.
I'm not surprised actually, but no, I appreciate it. A fair bit of ground covered, and it sounds like there's a bit more ground to cover. Polite pun, but yeah, thank you so much, Glenn, for taking the time to speak on the show today, and wish you all the best in what's going to happen, and hopefully get you back in the coming months to see some of these updates trickle through.
That'd be great. Bit of positive news.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.